The apartment door was supposed to stay closed. It was late summer in Milwaukee in 1991, the air thick and unmoving, the hallway humming with a tired fluorescent buzz. 2 officers stood outside Unit 213 because a terrified man had just led them here, shaking, pointing, insisting that something was wrong inside. The knob turned with a tired click. The smell came first, a sour weight that did not belong to cooking or a forgotten trash bag. It felt like the building itself held its breath. Inside, the living room looked ordinary, in the way a hotel room looks ordinary neutral carpet. A fish tank casting ripples across the wall. A tidy couch that suggested someone who wanted to be seen as normal. The young man who lived here spoke softly, evenly, as if explanation could smooth the ragged edges in the room. He offered a small smile that never reached his eyes. One officer noticed the camera on the table. The other noticed the lock on the bedroom door. A humming refrigerator filled the silence with a patient thrum. There is a particular kind of quiet that follows routine becoming rupture. A drawer opens. A photograph is glimpsed. A door swings inward. The officers do not shout. They step back as if distance could return the world to sense. In an instant, the thin story of a lonely neighbor collapses and reveals the structure beneath it, a plan, a pattern, a private universe built on possession and control. The apartment is no longer a room. It is a map of a mind that could not bear to be left alone. In the days to come, the country will learn a name it will not forget. Reporters will stand on this sidewalk and speak into cameras about the man upstairs. Neighbors will search their memories for details they missed, strange noises and strange smells they explained away, because explanations are easier than fear. But before the headlines and the courtroom sketches and the questions that will echo for years, there is this moment in the doorway where 2 lives and 17 stories converge, and where the first undeniable truth arrives like winter through a broken window. Sometimes the most frightening thing is not hatred made violent, but loneliness made permanent. Before the monster had a name, there was only Jeffrey, a quiet boy in rural Ohio who spent too much time alone. His house sat at the edge of a thick forest, where the world felt still, almost frozen in a permanent dusk. He liked to walk the roads after rainstorms, watching the glint of dead animals along the asphalt. While other kids ran toward the noise of life, Jeffrey moved toward its silence. His father, Lionel, was a chemist, precise, logical, uncomfortable with emotion. His mother, Joyce, suffered from panic attacks and long stretches of depression. Their fights were like storms that never cleared. The house was full of tension, and Jeffrey learned early that stillness was safer than speaking. When the shouting began, he would go outside and sit by the road, staring at the thin line where the woods met the sky. In school, he faded into the background. Teachers described him as polite but disconnected, like he's there but not really. He doodled skeletal animals in the margins of his notebooks, fascinated by what things looked like underneath. Once, he asked his father what would happen if you placed animal bones in acid. Lionel, thinking his son was simply curious about science, showed him. For Jeffrey, it was a revelation, a way to see inside, to reach something pure, unchanging. At home, he began collecting roadkill. Frogs, squirrels, even small dogs. He dissected them carefully, arranging their bones in jars. To him, it wasn't cruelty, it was control. A way to stop time, to make sure something stayed. But loneliness has a way of mutating when no one looks. Jeffrey grew up watching people connect, laugh, love always from a distance. By the time he was a teenager, he knew how to smile just enough to pass unnoticed. Yet, inside, a quiet hunger was forming, not for death, not yet, but for presence. For someone who wouldn't leave. In 1978, the year he graduated high school, his parents' marriage finally imploded. His father moved out. His mother packed the car and left town with Jeffrey's younger brother. The house went silent. For the first time, Jeffrey was completely alone. He began to drink whiskey in the morning, beer by noon. The alcohol didn't erase the emptiness. It just made it quieter. He would sit on the couch for hours, staring at the walls, imagining someone beside him who would never move, never leave, never stop breathing his air. That summer, he would meet a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks, a young man with a smile too kind for the road. They would share beers, laughter, and then the first taste of what Jeffrey had been craving all along, someone to stay. He wasn't born evil. He was born unseen. It was June of 1978. The air in Bath Township was thick and green, cicadas humming like static in the background. Jeffrey Dahmer was 18, pale, quiet, aimless, spending his days drinking and driving along empty county roads. His parents were gone. The house was his alone. The silence had finally become too loud. That's when he saw him. Stephen Hicks. 19 years old, long hair, a guitar slung over his shoulder, walking along the roadside with his thumb out. He was heading to a rock concert. Jeffrey slowed his car, pretending it was a casual decision. "You need a ride?" he asked, smiling too gently. Hicks climbed in, grateful, unsuspecting. They talked like two boys who might have been friends under other circumstances. Music, college, small talk that covered the awkward stillness beneath. Jeffrey invited him back for a few beers. "My parents aren't home." Hicks said yes. Inside the house, the afternoon light fell through dusty blinds. They drank, laughed a little. Jeffrey watched him closely, the warmth, the movement, the life that seemed to fill the room. When Hicks mentioned leaving for the concert, something inside Jeffrey tensed, sharp, and wordless. He couldn't bear it. When Hicks stood up to go, Jeffrey reached for a dumbbell from behind the couch. The sound was dull, not cinematic, just final. The air left the room, and in that instant, Jeffrey crossed the invisible line between longing and possession. He sat beside the body for hours, talking softly, as if conversation could undo what had happened. Then came the panic and the methodical calm that would later define him. He dragged the body to the crawl space, open, and studied the stillness as if searching for a reason. He dissolved pieces of bone in acid, just as his father once showed him. What remained, he buried in the backyard, under the trees where no one ever walked. That night, the house was silent again, but Jeffrey didn't feel alone anymore. For the first time in his life, someone had stayed. He cleaned the living room, took a shower, and looked at himself in the mirror. There was no horror, no triumph, only a strange, exhausted peace. He didn't want him to die, he just didn't want him to leave. And so the pattern began small, precise, invisible, the kind of evil that doesn't roar but whispers. Milwaukee, 1987. The city was gray, industrial, and tired, a place that didn't ask too many questions, especially about the quiet people who kept to themselves. In a small apartment on North 25th Street, Jeffrey Dahmer began again. 9 years had passed since the first body. 9 years of trying to be normal. He worked in a chocolate factory, smiled politely to coworkers, kept to his routine. But loneliness never leaves, it only waits. He started frequenting the gay bars downtown, dim lights, cheap beer, nameless faces. There, in the pulse of the music and sweat, Jeffrey found what he thought he was missing. Men who would come home with him, trust him, fall asleep beside him. The night was his disguise. But morning always brought the same dread, the sound of someone getting dressed to leave. The need returned, heavier this time. At first, he tried to make them stay through conversation, through pleading, then through force, then through silence. The line between company and captivity dissolved completely. He began to experiment, sleeping pills crushed into drinks, a body unmoving under his hands. Control, always control. Neighbors noticed the smell like rotten meat. They heard drills, thuds, the whir of a saw. When they asked, he smiled softly and said, "My freezer broke." They accepted it. He was quiet, polite, not the kind of man anyone feared. And the police? They came close. Once, when a boy escaped from Jeffrey's apartment, naked, bleeding, disoriented, 2 women in the building, called 911. The boy spoke no English. Jeffrey told the officers it was just a domestic argument between lovers. The police laughed, embarrassed, and handed the boy back to him. Minutes later, the child was dead. The file was closed. The system moved on. The system didn't fail once. It failed 17 times. As months passed, the walls of his apartment grew crowded bones, photographs, skulls arranged with meticulous care. Each object was a monument to his fear of abandonment. His freezer became a shrine of preservation, heads, hearts, fragments of memory. Yet, for all his control, the edges began to fray. The smells grew stronger, the lies thinner. His eyes hollowed, his skin grayed. The loneliness he tried to bury now lived inside every room. On the 22nd of July 1991, Jeffrey brought another man home, Tracy Edwards. He offered a drink, a movie, a handcuff. But this time, something shifted. When Jeffrey turned his back, Edwards ran. Down the hallway, barefoot, wrist chained, screaming for help. Moments later, police officers followed him back to the apartment. the same apartment where the story began, apartment 213. Inside the refrigerator, they found what no one wanted to believe. Wrapped in plastic, organs sealed in bags, photographs of dismembered bodies arranged like souvenirs. The city that had looked away for over a decade finally had to see. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that doesn't wait for words, but for something deeper, a sign that any of this could make sense. Jeffrey Dahmer sat in a beige shirt, hands folded neatly, eyes lowered. No tears, no defiance, only stillness. When the judge asked if he understood the charges, he nodded. 17 counts of murder. 17 lives. 17 names that no longer echoed beyond their family's grief. The prosecutors detailed every horror, the photographs, the bones, the freezer. The gallery cried, some gasped, some left. But Jeffrey never looked up. When given the chance to speak, his voice was calm, almost gentle. I know my time in this world is over. I knew it the moment they opened that door. What I did was beyond evil. I created my own world, a place where I thought I could keep them with me. I thought that made it love. No one in the room breathed. He spoke of loneliness, of obsession, of an urge he could never quiet. He didn't ask for mercy. He didn't blame his parents, his childhood, or the system that failed to stop him. He simply said, I wish I could give back what I took, but I can't. For some, it sounded like remorse. For others, like another manipulation, the final mask of control. Families of the victims were given their turn. One by one, they stood shaking, screaming, sobbing. One woman shouted, I hate you, Dahmer, I hate you. He didn't flinch. Another parent whispered, May God have mercy on your soul. The judge's gavel struck once, twice, 3 times. Sentence, 15 consecutive life terms. Over 900 years in prison. Reporters filled the streets outside. The words, monster, cannibal, evil incarnate flooded the headlines. But inside the prison walls, Jeffrey Dahmer became quiet again, polite, compliant, strangely serene. He attended Bible study. He told the prison chaplain he wanted to be baptized. He said he believed God could forgive anyone. One interviewer asked if he felt guilt. Jeffrey looked down and said, almost softly, Guilt isn't enough. I wish I could feel pain for what I did, but mostly, I feel nothing. That, perhaps, was the truest confession of all. Morning in Columbia, correctional institution, always began the same. The metallic clank of gates, the smell of bleach, the faint echo of a world that forgot how to care. Jeffrey Dahmer swept the chapel floors, read his Bible, and smiled at the guards. He said he had found peace. Some believed him, some didn't. He became a ghost moving through routines, eating alone, reading scripture, writing polite letters to his father. I've accepted what I am, he wrote once, and I know I deserve whatever comes next. But even in prison, where every man wore his sins on his sleeve, Jeffrey stood apart. He didn't fight, didn't argue. He just existed. Until one morning, November 28th, 1994. He was assigned cleaning duty with 2 other inmates. One of them, Christopher Scarver, was a man who claimed he spoke to God. As guards left them unsupervised, the prison hummed with its usual dull rhythm footsteps. Water running, metal scraping against tile. Then, the silence cracked. A scream, short and sharp. Then another. When the guards returned, they found Dahmer on the floor, his skull by a metal bar. His body twisted in a pool of his own blood, the same red he had once drained from others. Scarver told officers, God told me to do it. And just like that, Jeffrey Dahmer, the man who feared being left alone, met his end in isolation. No final words, no audience, just silence swallowing silence. News of his death spread like fire. Some celebrated. Some wept for the victims who never truly got justice. Others wondered if forgiveness had any place in this story at all. His ashes were divided between his parents, 2 people who had once held a baby, and could never understand what he became. Yet the world couldn't let him go. Documentaries, interviews, reenactments his name lingered, retold, reshaped. The apartment was torn down, the lot paved over, but even now, people drive by and whisper, this is where he lived. Perhaps the most chilling truth is that Jeffrey Dahmer didn't emerge from the darkness. He was born in it, and the world around him simply never noticed. In the end, it wasn't hatred that created him. It was loneliness, the kind that turns affection into obsession and silence into hunger. The camera pans out the empty lot where apartment 213 once stood, grass trembling in the wind. No screams, no ghosts, just the quiet hum of a city that will never fully sleep again. Because evil, once named, never truly dies. It just waits for someone else who can't stand to be alone.